Chapter 1 Catastrophe Eschatology. My Proficiency Panel. Chapter 1 Apocalypse of Catastrophe. If one day disaster comes, in the face of the crisis of survival and the threat of death, is it important to have your own power, or the power to mobilize it? To the left, choose your own great power. To the right, choose power. Half dream and half awake, there seemed to be two light doors on the left and right in front of me, and the ghost walked to the left. In August, the high sun made the noisy city look like an oven, and the pitch-black ground was covered with hot heat. In an old neighborhood, in a small rental house, a young man slapped his head and rushed into the bathroom. "Damn it! I won't stay up late tonight." A faint curse sounded in the small room, accompanied by the sound of washing water. Peng Zhi's glance was caught by Li Ming, and he no longer told Zhang Yuan Duo that he had brought everything back to his room in each other's smile, and could not help but breathe a sigh of relief after being neatly arranged. "Forget it. Go to sleep. When the rent is due, you must change to an air-conditioned room." A moment later, Li Ming, who walked out of the washroom, looked at the small room in the house he shared with others, took a long breath, and then shook his head, ready to go out. Thinking, Li Ming could not help scanning the room and finally landed on the brand-new iron sword erected by the long table behind the door and a red tasseled gun with the head of the Overlord's gun. After a brief exchange, Li Ming hurried down the flat. "When I got off the subway and got on the battery car, I remembered two things in my mind. The female manager who trained them had white legs." Chapter 1 Catastrophe Eschatology. My Proficiency Panel. The idea of taking out and playing with the weapons bought by Taobao was suddenly springing up in my heart. Although all kinds of ideas of diligent practice retreated bravely after I bought them, I didn't play much at all, and I have been eating ash until now. The key is to change your shoes when you go out. Next to the table and chair stood a red tasseled gun and an iron sword, but it was obvious from the faint dust that he was eating dust all the year round. In addition, there are many beautiful young women in the company, which makes Li Ming look forward to the changes this new job will bring to his life, and even create a sense of hope for the future. After wiping off his sweat, he really didn't bother to cook in the kitchen he shared with Peng Zhi's family. Even if his own pot was there, he simply cut up the watermelon he bought and ate it all for dinner. So Li Ming really brushed it to 12 o'clock. Li Ming glanced at the other side, whose smooth and delicate legs made him afraid to look more, but just hurried past the living room. "I'll go first." The simple layout of the room can be seen through the sunlight, with a big bed, a refrigerator, a wardrobe on the east side, a table and chair near the door on the west side, and a bathroom in the depths. "Yo, I bought so many things back. I did a lot of shopping today." Li Ming's body wriggled, thinking about the dryness and heat that had just gone upstairs, and the comfort of lying on the bed and blowing fans. The coolness of the watermelon really untied the dryness of the body. After eating, I threw away the watermelon peel, wiped the table, lay comfortably on the bed, and could not help exhaling after turning on the fan. Zhang Yuan watched Li Ming go down the building curiously, a little curious about her strange neighbor, but the relationship between the two was not very good, so she stopped the idea. Li Ming responded with a smile that the commuting hours of the two were about the same, so it was normal that they often met during commuting hours. While talking, Zhang Yuan's husband, Peng Zhi, glanced at him from his room when he heard the noise, then ignored him. "When I got to the door, I happened to meet my neighbor, his wife and young wife who was off duty. It just so happens that when the food at home is finished, I will replenish it." Although he is a neighbor, because of the taboo of identity, Li Ming never communicates too much in order to avoid male and female defense. He is afraid that he cannot help but get angry one day and slowly make some embarrassing things, coupled with the disagreement between her husband and Li Ming. So they know very little about each other. The first time Li Ming went to the new company, he naturally entered in high spirits, but as a result, he only did a simple training with several other newcomers in the afternoon, and this afternoon was over. As for the contradiction between Li Ming and her husband, it was nothing to say, except that several times Li Ming took the initiative to greet him when he met the line of sight, even with contempt in his eyes. Just graduated this year, like most people, he had clean pockets, rented a house, looked for a job, and was full of holes everywhere. He finally got used to it for half a year, and his last marketing job was also dismissed. I happen to have no cooking, and there is still plenty of time. I am comfortable and can go to bed early when browsing Douyin. Li Ming immediately convinced himself, then went to the bathroom to take a shower, lay comfortably on the bed in his underwear, and browsed Douyin with satisfaction. According to the house rental contract, if he does not rent for 6 months, his deposit will be 1,200, but he will not be able to get it back from the intermediary. He has only been living in the house for 3 months, and he has to put up with his discomfort. However, this kind of conversation is limited to this. Li Ming naturally does not have a warm face and a cold ass, and the other party makes him feel that he is a very self-centered man. Over time, the two are a bit of a stranger, and the connection between the two families depends on Zhang Yuan's few conversations with him. Thinking about the choices he made to save money, Li Ming, who had experienced air conditioning at the company all afternoon, thought secretly that he was used to the hot and dry summer, but he thought he could bear to fan a fan at night, so he no longer cared. Rule change begins. Those who adapt are born. Those who are not fit are turned into corpses. Proficiency panel open. What is it? Li Ming was stupefied, and before he could watch it carefully, he felt his brain confused and fell asleep on the bed. It was as if a hazy black fog swept through, and in an instant, the whole planet fell into silence. Chapter 2 Doomsday Proficiency Panel _Eschatological Cataclysm. My Proficiency Panel. Chapter 2 Doomsday Proficiency Panel. It was as if the bone marrow had been emptied, and a strong sense of inadaptability made Li Ming wake up in a struggle. He suddenly opened his eyes and the room was bright. I fell asleep in a daze. What was that last night? Li Ming couldn't help being dismayed. He slept so well that he didn't even dream for a second. The excellent sleep experience that he hadn't had for a long time made him feel so good that he was in a good mood. But I can't help but feel doubt about what popped up before I went to bed last night. What cataclysm doomsday? What proficiency panel? Confused in his heart, he couldn't help getting out of bed and wanted to go to the window to check the situation. He couldn't help turning on his cell phone and looked at it. It was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he suddenly felt stunned. He had slept for so long. Then I was about to put the phone down, but suddenly I took a look at the upper right corner. Why is there no signal on your cell phone? Li Ming's fingers tightened involuntarily, combined with the strange last night and the too quiet early morning. A bad premonition rose in his heart, and then he took his cell phone and slippers to the window in the middle of the room and looked down. He is not a loner, and in this case it is obviously better for people to discuss together than to wait alone, because more people always find more information than people. Even a fool would not bump his head into a tree so hard, and then continue to pounce on the next one as if nothing had happened. The sun was shining outside, but the neighborhood was empty and there was no one. Under the decline of one and the other, there is no way for him to live. Fortunately, the sound of Peng Zhi's voice made Li Ming shake his head and could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. Just now he wondered if Peng Zhi had turned into a zombie and attacked Zhang Yuan again. Fortunately, it wasn't. Finally, once it made him feel a little smoother. The end of the cataclysm. The fittest survive, the unaccustomed turn into corpses. Gone. No, we can't rely on these unknown possibilities. We have to find a way to save ourselves. Li Ming has a toothache, not to mention the swordsmanship of hip pulling, not to mention killing zombies. After practicing for a long time, he even suspected that his arm would be swollen. What kind of monster is this? He could not help but burst his strength, thinking about how to pierce the sword correctly, while piercing the sword in his hand again and again. Lifespan 23 University Year 95. Thinking about the electric transfer in his mind, Li Ming could not help but feel very lucky that he had weapons and purchased some materials in advance. The sound. Is it Zhang Yuan's? What happened? The end came so suddenly. So much so that after more than 10 times, the swordsmanship was not correctly stabbed out once, and the hilt of the sword hit his little arm red. The shared house is on the 5th floor, which is not very high, so Li Ming can look much the same to the people downstairs. At present, the biggest change should be the leisurely zombies outside. As long as I don't go out, this danger should be avoided. But what should I do after my food is finished? Even because the track of the sword is not straight, the end of the hilt hit on the arm with a strange force to stab out. There is no power to say, but also hurt themselves. He hurriedly closed the window. Chapter 2 Doomsday Proficiency Panel _Eschatological Cataclysm. My Proficiency Panel. He closed the curtains, turned around and suddenly took the sword that he had put in the corner to eat ashes. He felt secure in his hand. From there, we can see that although the zombies are scary, they are not too terrible, although they are not as bad as those realized in movies and TV dramas, but at least they are not completely impossible to face. The uneasiness in my heart fell to the ground from the air, as if the tide had receded a lot. Lunge, stab, sword, mutilated skill. Now that the end is coming, is everything useless? With his mind in a mess, Li Ming suddenly felt a sense of crisis. Li Ming couldn't help smiling, and then he got up and looked at the two weapons. Unless this zombie is a special case of weakness. Li Ming clenched the hilt of the sword, and wave after wave of joy rose in his heart, and he only felt that he could instantly poke away the clouds and see the blue sky. Even if there is a fool to do this, then after a collision is bound to fall to the ground, rather than leave lively. Suddenly think of their neighbors next door. Eyes flinch. What if they also become demon corpses? Li Minglian hurriedly ran to the door and locked the door fiercely, then blocked the door with the only table, breathed a sigh of relief, then sat back by the bed, picked up his cell phone and looked at it. There was no signal and he was suddenly in a daze. If you want to practice swordsmanship, you have to find a way, and starting with these basic skills that he has learned is the only effective way he can think of. So, over the past 2 days, if you can, there is a small supermarket next to the community. Even if it is dangerous to eat, you have to go to the supermarket to get some supplies first. I can't believe there are fucking zombies. Otherwise, zombies will show up directly in the shared house, and it will be troublesome. Skill. Lunge sword. 1% for beginners. Life expectancy should be the current age and the number of years I can live to, and of course I can live to 95 years in good health, which is already higher than the average life expectancy. Unconvinced, Li Ming continued to practice with clenched teeth and the stiff feeling of his arm. Fortunately, he didn't get nothing after 10 times of thinking. At the very least, he was proficient in posture, so he stabbed it more than 10 times in succession. Just when Li Ming was confused and wanted to go back to get dressed, he suddenly saw a figure burst into the field of vision. He could not help but look away, and his pupils shrank immediately. Name: Li Ming. There is never a lack of courage in people's hearts, but they have not been pushed to the end. Otherwise, even a man would dare to splash 3 feet of blood. What's more, a young man in his early 20s like Li Ming is full of passionate blood in his heart. I felt wasted money when I regretted it before, but now it seems that it is much more important than money. The long blade of the long sword on the right, 75 centimeters, is as long as 105 centimeters. Li Ming quickly went to eat something to fill his stomach, and then took the sword to the empty part of the room and couldn't help but want to try. Once upon a time, weapons were just toys, and food was nothing but bought and made to save money. But now these have become the basis for survival. Is this the hint that rose last night, the proficiency panel? Then I couldn't help thinking, hurriedly put on my clothes and shoes, and then sat down on the bed and blew the fan. Standing by the bed. Chapter 2 Doomsday Proficiency Panel _Eschatological Cataclysm. My Proficiency Panel. Li Ming opened his mouth slightly, showing a touch of surprise in his heart. Don't scream. If you hear me, you will come to us. A line of handwriting floated by, and in an instant, a stack of information unfolded in front of Li Ming. Hoo-hoo. They are all called corpses, and it is possible to get stronger and stronger at that time. When the information was digested, he studied the panel carefully and found that except for the response from the skill bar, there was no response from the other data. The red tasseled gun on the left is 2.2 meters long. In fact, this length is only an entry-level model, but it is enough for beginners, so Li Ming did not buy a longer one, but if you practice, you can't use it in this weapon room. The long sword casually waved a few times to ease the mood, and Li Ming recalled the basic skill of swordsmanship that he had learned at the beep station on a whim lunge jabbing. After studying the information one by one, it was found that nothing could be moved. Li Ming finally could not help but click on the only introduction that could move the lunge and stab the sword, and the next moment the information was printed into view. Does the name show your real name directly? You can't change it. Meow. He couldn't help getting up from where he was and began to think about how he should survive. Feeling that there was no danger, Li Ming just went out to have a look. Now that such a great change has taken place, he has to discuss countermeasures with his neighbors. He has just found a job with many beauties and money. Li Ming thought about it for a moment. Yesterday's supplementary grain included a bag of 40 jin of rice, a bag of 10 jin of flour, 10 jin of pork, vegetables and fruits, seasoning, and the rest of the pickles. The extreme survival can last him 2 months. But 2 months later, sit back and wait for rescue? The long sword came out of the scabbard, and the almost unused body was still as bright as new. Li Ming put down the scabbard and stood in place with the sword. When his heart tightened, Li Ming felt a thick sense of horror. Within a certain range, a person's strength can be greatly increased in a short period of time. If he exercises in the past few days, takes advantage of his knives and guns, and makes use of environmental factors, he may not be able to kill. The black cat dodged quickly, and the monster pounced on the green tree. At the moment, in his line of sight, a rotten monster with some tissues falling out of its sockets in front of him was mad at a black cat in the neighborhood. After repeating it more than 10 times in succession, Li Ming felt a little tired in his arm. His finished sword weighs 3 jin, which doesn't sound like much, but it's really difficult for him to play freely without exercise for a long time. After thinking about it, I didn't rush to open the door to see, but walked gently behind the door to listen. Thinking quickly, Li Ming immediately thought of going out to search for materials. He tightened his weapons and could not help thinking of the scene in which the zombie was injured after hitting a big tree. Li Ming was stunned by the simple introduction message, and was immediately pulled back to his mind by a sudden scream outside the door. Miso. The long sword went forward. The weight made Li Ming very uncomfortable, and his posture was a little distorted. Wow! The long sword pierced forward, and the body of the sword stabbed smoothly along a track, even though the hilt of the sword did not hit his arm. But the black cat had run away from the long jump, and the monster seemed to be stuck by something. Chapter 2 Doomsday Proficiency Panel _Catastrophe. My Proficiency Panel. It screamed like a throat, and then disappeared from view with more eyeballs that fell out. Li Ming couldn't help but think that even if he really lasted for 2 months, he would probably be panting when he walked 2 steps weak, and the zombies outside might not change much. Experience points for lunge staring sword +1. Ah, what a monster! Swoosh! Li Ming couldn't help but frown, put away his sword and looked outside. Li Ming retracted it in satisfaction, thinking that his arm would finally no longer be injured. He was just about to show a gratified smile, but the next moment he was suddenly stunned and immediately grasped the sword handle happily. Li Ming was deeply shocked. He subconsciously thought of the strange words that suddenly popped up last night. The green tree trembled from the impact, as if a strong man had attacked fiercely. Thinking about it in his heart, he took a breath and turned around. He was a little stiff but tried his best to follow the steps he had memorized in his heart, and then thrust the sword forward fiercely. If he still had the idea of putting on makeup before the man hit the tree, then this idea in his heart disappeared with the bump and the weird roar, combined with the sound of last night. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. If you miss any information because you are alone, you may miss an opportunity to change the status quo. While thinking in his heart, Li Ming also opened the door and walked to the living room. He looked into Zhang Yuan's room. Wearing slippers and hot pants, Zhang Yuan, who exposed her white and slender legs, was standing in the corridor of the room facing the door with a panicked and confused expression. Li Ming even saw some private areas squeezed out from the bottom under her hot pants. Next to her, Peng Zhijing, wearing underpants and a white sweatshirt, stared out the window with an embarrassed expression. Chapter 3 Incompetent People _Eschatological Cataclysm. My Proficiency Panel. Chapter 3 The Incompetent. Have you seen it? There are zombies outside. The sound in the living room brought back Peng Zhi and Zhang Yuan, who are now full of stiffness, and Peng Zhi seemed to be startled. The two hurriedly looked back and happened to see Li Ming, neatly dressed and carrying a long sword, standing in the living room. Yes, as you can see, there are zombies downstairs. Zhang Yuan suddenly thought of the zombies downstairs, and her face suddenly turned white. But when she saw the fear in other people's hearts, she found a vent and hurriedly turned around to respond. What the hell is going on? Even the zombies have come out. I have to go out and have a look. When faced with the danger of monsters, other humans can naturally get some sense of security. Peng Zhi, who looks very ugly, also said subconsciously, but froze in place before he got out of his own house. No, now there are monsters like zombies outside. It's too dangerous to go out like this. Call the police. Let's call the police first, Peng Zhi said to himself in a hasty voice, and his voice fell and gasped for breath, and he tried to take his cell phone out of his pocket, but as soon as he touched the air, he suddenly opened his mouth. Where's my phone? Damn it, where's my phone? Two shouts in succession. Looking around eagerly, the neck turned red angrily, and then suddenly found his cell phone on the long table in the rear, rushed to open it and took a look. Peng Zhi was silly, and the whole person was stupefied in the same place. Zhang Yuan on one side also took out her cell phone and looked at it, and her eyes changed with the same amazement. Now that they are emotionally shocked, they may not be able to discuss anything even if they want to discuss it. Let's wait until they are calm. Each increase in the value of experience makes Li Ming's mastery of the lunge sword deeper, and now his mastery of the lunge sword has increased with the increase of more than 30 proficiency at the level of beginner practice. It's really weak, but luckily I didn't go out rashly to kill zombies. When Li Ming returned to his room, he smoked at the corner of his mouth, and he was a little speechless in his heart. I hope they have enough food too, and he is determined to train weapons every day, and if someone helps him cook or something, he can have more time to train. Whoosh! However, if it really comes to that, in the face of the only living person around him, Li Ming does not know whether he will choose to lend out the food. It's just, with the piercing of more than 40 swords in succession, his right arm holding the long sword also became sour and weak, which is the sequela of the sudden outbreak of strength for a long time without exercise. Li Ming's mind turned gently, and then he thought that, instead of waiting any longer, he took the opportunity to pick up his sword and began to practice in the room. Then every time Li Ming came out of the sword, he attentively experienced the feeling of exerting force together with his legs, waist and arms, and carefully controlled the trajectory of the sword. Feeling the weakness of his right arm, Li Ming helplessly stopped. Instead, he sheathed his sword and put it against the wall. He took a cup of water with his left hand and drank it. There is only half a bucket of bottled water left. Although the tap water here is also drinkable, it is hard to say if the water is cut off. What is the standard of a person? In fact, in the face of a crisis, it is best. Chapter 3 Incompetent People _Eschatological Cataclysm. My Proficiency Panel. Being able to withdraw cash, Peng Zhiping dragged 70,000 to 80,000 yuan a day. But now he didn't respond for such a long time when something happened, which is kind of funny. In this way, no matter from what angle the two men can make good use of them, they can help him, but they just didn't expect that Peng Zhi would pull his hip like this at the critical moment. The sword was no better than the others, and the interval between each one was shorter, so it wasn't long before Li Ming stabbed out more than 40 swords in succession. After such 40 swords, he did not have the strength to stab the sword anymore. While drinking water, Li Ming suddenly remembered something and hurriedly went to the bathroom to turn on the faucet and picked up the water in the bucket. He also wanted to discuss with them how to get along and how to live when the eschatology came. After the sword has a feel, it is much easier to practice. Coupled with the coming of eschatology, the zombies are obviously sloshing in the community downstairs, and he has a sense of urgency in his heart, so the idea of training becomes more and more urgent. It's disgusting to meet a trash teammate. The long sword broke the air and stabbed straight out of the force, and the track of the long sword showed a perfect straight line, hitting hard in front of it. At the very least, when you can stab the sword seriously, the long sword can almost always be stabbed smoothly, and there will be no more embarrassing things like uneven body or even hitting your own arm at the tail of the sword. How can there be no signal? Lunge sword experience +1. He stood half bent with his legs apart, his right hand with a long sword pointing flat, and then twisted his waist and stabbed forward with all his strength. Although Li Ming's grain has been replenished for a while, he can't eat those dishes for long, let alone two adults. Li Ming frowned and looked at the two of them, withdrew his eyes from Zhang Yuan's leg, turned and returned to the room. Among them, 32 swords reached the standard, and the remaining 8 swords did not reach the standard due to poor performance, so they did not accumulate experience. Looking at the numbers floating in front of him, Li Ming smiled at the corners of his mouth. Now that it was so dangerous outside, and it was clear of the eschatological crisis, he did not want to borrow such a precious thing as food, nor did he want to hear two people make this opening on him. It would be more like helping with something. In particular, he has long had the idea of going out to solve the dangerous search for food, and his own strength is bound to become strong enough under the action of plugins. There's no signal. Every time Li Ming tried his best to stab out the long sword with the greatest strength, and every time Li Ming tried his best to control the smooth piercing of the long sword. Although he has a mysterious panel to improve his strength, it will be safer if he has a reliable teammate in a short time, even if he is the main force when he has to go out in search of food in the future. This Peng Zhi, who usually seems to think he is high and strong, is so useless when something happens. But even so, he didn't want to see others eat his own every day. How annoying it would be. Some tension arises in Li Ming's heart. It is impossible for him to have food without water. Moreover, he has to train. What he needs most is water when he is sweating every day. Water is absolutely impossible without water. As for salt, he still has more than half a box at home. When I was surfing the internet, I happened to see a whole box at a special price and bought it, but now I seem to be grateful. In addition, there are 2 large pots of oil, as well as other materials that can be used in a short time. Only water. Very nervous. Seeing that the bucket was still full for some time, he took the basin to the kitchen, turned on the edible tap water in the kitchen, and picked up the water in the basin. Chapter 4 Discussion _ Eschatological Cataclysm. My Proficiency Panel. Chapter 4 Deliberation. There was the sound of running water from the faucet, and when one basin in the kitchen was full and changed to the second basin, Li Ming hurriedly went home with the first basin of water, went to the bathroom and waited for a while and turned off the faucet when the bucket was full. The bucket filled with water changed its place. His sore right arm was very uncomfortable when doing these things. Like a needle, Li Ming gritted his teeth and then went to the kitchen to fill the second basin with water and put it on with the last empty basin. So back and forth, the 3 basins and a bucket are all filled and stored directly under the water heater, and the worry in the heart is still not alleviated. In particular, from time to time outside the window came unhuman-like roars and fierce screams of pain, including the word cannibalism, and Li Ming was sweating on his forehead. You can't let the pain in your right arm go so far. You have to relieve the massage. Li Ming thought to himself, followed by the dark sky, touched his stomach, and went to cook dinner. He wanted to have a rest after eating, but he looked at the red tasseled gun standing next to him, and still couldn't help coming from the bedroom to the living room with a long gun in his left hand. Compared with the bedroom, it is much more spacious here, and the 2.2-meter-long gun can barely open. He must be familiar with both weapons as soon as possible. Li Ming looked back at Peng Zhi's house. His bedroom door was open and ventilated. In the living room, he could see that the guy was still pressing his cell phone and sitting in the bed wriggling around, while Zhang Yuan also looked at him at a loss, shook her head, left hand in front, right hand in the back, and lunged to pick up the long gun and stabbed hard. What we can do now is to stay at home first, work hard to strive for the ability to protect ourselves, and then wait for the chance of rescue. No movement. Seeing Zhang Yuan's pale face and knowing that she wanted an idea in her heart, Li Ming opened his mouth quickly, and her voice was not urgent or slow. Zhang Yuan's nervous look relieved somewhat. Li Ming said sincerely to Zhang Yuan, who woke up like a dream after hearing Li Ming's words, and then thought about the food in her family, looking a little anxious. There is only a little room left in our family. I am going to replenish it at my next rest. What are we going to do? And because of his swordsmanship, he only downloaded a few teaching videos when it came to marksmanship, and threw it in the corner to eat ash just like swordsmanship. If you exercise well, I don't know how far it will go. Li Ming raised his brow and asked in a deep voice. He did not dare to continue to practice, and he already had a premonition that he would be sore all over his muscles when he woke up tomorrow. When Zhang Yuan saw Li Ming open the door, she hurriedly opened her mouth. Just in her room, she saw with her own eyes what happened on the opposite side of the building. Now she still looks pale. Don't worry. Go back and tell your husband to exercise well these days. Pick up the clothes pole and practice. Eat better these days. After practice, we will go out together to look for food. There is a lot of food in the supermarket in the neighborhood. Whoosh! Li Ming took a light breath, and the shot did not use the strength of the waist with arms and legs. However, it will be safer if you can cooperate with two people when you go out to explore. Chapter 4 Discussion _ Eschatological Cataclysm. My Proficiency Panel. A session of exercise is not only muscle weakness but also full of sweat, while there is still water to wash quickly. Zhang Yuan pursed her lips and said hurriedly. However, this is another set of movements. Li Ming feels that he is really a little trembling. Although those monsters look terrible, in fact, their strength is similar to that of ordinary people. As long as we men have a good exercise, it should not be difficult to deal with the rational use of weapons. So this time, of course, he did not receive a panel reaction. He took the gun to draw a circle to the left and leaned back to use the bar, then straightened the gun to the right to use it, and then leaned forward to use the prick. 5 days? Finally, the movement is consistent and smooth. Hearing the inquiry, it should be Zhang Yuan's. Li Ming wiped his hair and endured the pain to open the door. It is normal that proficiency is not increased. When the bedroom door opened, Zhang Yuan was still dressed as she had just seen, with soft and clear clothes, half-pursed lips and worried face, standing in front of the door with her legs side by side. Gun proficiency +1. There was a transparency in front of him, and the information at the top of the field of vision floated by. Li Ming immediately felt that he had a feeling in his heart, and he encouraged him to stop the gun again. In another stabbing exercise, Li Ming's right arm felt more numb and powerless, but this time, compared with the first time, he adjusted many directions. At least the posture was made. He then stopped, took, and stabbed the gun for the 3rd time. It was also painful to take a bath when he was weak. Li Ming finished washing all the way, changed his clothes, wiped his hair, and suddenly heard a knock at the door. No, it's different from swordsmanship. After all, a gun is no easier to carry than a sword. It's too eye-catching to go out with a gun. Li Ming is embarrassed, so he didn't practice it at all. No matter what causes the phone failure, the disappearance of the internet, and these biting monsters, it can only prove that it is very dangerous outside. Skill. Stick a gun, 1% for beginners. How much time is there? Stop, take, stab. It's still enough for 5 days. Li Ming looked at Zhang Yuan and said earnestly that her face was somewhat relieved, but some at a loss followed. How much food do you have at home? How long you can eat? Do a good calculation, and tell your husband to take good exercise these 2 days. Only then will I have a chance to go out and replenish my supplies. Is it convenient, Li Ming? Is a stabbing failure. Whoosh! She knew it wasn't as simple as biting. I just saw you practicing your gun in the living room. Do you know what's going on outside? You can't get through the phone, you can't get on the internet, and there are monsters. Bite! The body stood up from the horse step, who knew it had already felt a kind of pain, and the corners of his mouth twitched. Li Ming walked back to the room with a little weakness, put the red tasseled gun away, then thought about it, picked up the towel and went into the bathroom. The basic attack of marksmanship is blocking Nazar, and Li Ming's stab is the prick in the foundation of marksmanship. Of course, it is just like this with the term of video science, but he is not very clear about exactly how. Although in Li Ming's view, sticking a gun is the most important means of attack, since blocking is classified as the basis, it proves that it is very important. Li Ming does not want to take care of one at the expense of the other, so he has practiced it together for the first time. Prick. Whoosh! The long gun thrust forward violently, perhaps because he had some experience in practicing the sword, and this one was okay, but the numbness and weakness of the arm involved and the faint pain on the right leg and waist used to practice the sword still made Li Ming's mouth twitch. Well, it's just a lack of proficiency, and there's no way to make a more obvious change. Li Ming thought in his heart and opened her mouth. Zhang Yuan nodded again and again. I went to Peng Ji to say that you happen to have weapons. Zhang Yuan hurriedly turned around and stepped on her slippers and told what Li Ming said to Peng Zhi, who was still anxiously fiddling with her mobile phone. Peng Zhi frowned at this. What kind of brain is he? He still wants to go out when it's so dangerous outside. If he doesn't go, he wants to go by himself. Anyway, I'll just stay at home and wait for help.